For more than 60 years, Clint Walker was admired as a man who never broke. On screen, he was Cheyenne Bowdy, calm, towering, and unshakable, a symbol of strength that millions trusted without question. But after his death, his daughter revealed that the man behind that image lived with constant pain, fear, and isolation that the public never saw. What fans once dismissed as rumors were, in fact, fragments of a much heavier truth Clint Walker spent his entire life trying to hide. The man Hollywood needed him to be. When Clint Walker became a household name, Hollywood didn't just cast him, it locked him into an image. Standing over 6.5 feet tall with a powerful frame and a naturally restrained demeanor, Walker was perfectly suited for the role of Cheyenne Bowdy. The series demanded authority, physical endurance, and emotional control, and Walker delivered all three with ease. From the outside, it looked effortless. In reality, it required constant discipline. Warner Brothers quickly understood that Walker's silence was his greatest asset. He was not promoted as a talkative star or a charming personality. He was marketed as a presence. Interviews were carefully managed. He avoided controversy. He rarely discussed his personal life even when directly asked. At a time when other actors used publicity to build careers, Walker did the opposite. He disappeared when the cameras stopped rolling. This approach worked. Cheyenne became one of the most successful Western series of its era, running for years and cementing Walker's reputation as a dependable leading man. But the demands of that success were punishing. Filming schedules were intense, locations were physically demanding, and Walker performed much of his own action work. Long days on horseback, outdoor shoots, and minimal rest became routine. He never complained publicly. According to later accounts from his family, he believed complaining would be seen as weakness. Off camera, the pressure to remain Clint Walker never lifted. Studio executives expected him to stay physically imposing and emotionally consistent. There was little room for vulnerability. His daughter would later explain that her father felt trapped by the very image that gave him success. He feared that if audiences saw cracks, everything he built could collapse. This fear shaped how he lived. Walker compartmentalized his life with precision. Work was work, family was family, pain was private. He did not allow these worlds to overlap. To the public, this discipline looked like strength. To those closest to him, it created distance. By the time Cheyenne ended, Walker had achieved what most actors only dream of: fame, financial stability, and industry respect. Yet the habits he developed to survive that success never left him. Silence had protected his career. Now it governed his entire life. And this was only the beginning of what his daughter would later confirm. The private life he kept under control. Away from Hollywood's carefully maintained image, Clint Walker's real life followed a far more demanding rhythm. By the late 1950s, while Cheyenne was still at its peak, Walker was already living with constant physical strain. Years of factory work, riverboat labor, and service in the merchant marine had conditioned him to push through pain rather than acknowledge it. That mindset never changed once fame arrived. Walker married young and took his role as a provider seriously. According to his daughter, he viewed responsibility as non-negotiable. Long absences from home were accepted as part of the job, not something to be questioned. Filming schedules often kept him away for weeks at a time, and when he returned, he carried the exhaustion with him. He did not decompress by talking. He compartmentalized instead. Throughout the 60s, Walker's workload expanded beyond television. Feature films demanded travel, physical performance, and relentless availability. Even as Westerns declined in popularity, he continued accepting roles that required endurance rather than emotional exposure. His daughter later explained that her father deliberately avoided characters that mirrored inner conflict. He feared that blurring that line might invite scrutiny into his own life. Health issues accumulated quietly. Chronic pain became routine. Injuries healed slowly, yet Walker refused to slow down. Family members noticed that he treated discomfort as a personal failing rather than a medical reality. When advised to rest, he worked harder. When warned to be cautious, he dismissed concern. The turning point came in the early 70s on Mammoth Mountain. While skiing, Walker lost control and suffered a catastrophic fall. A ski pole pierced his chest and penetrated his heart. At the hospital, he was briefly pronounced dead. Only the intervention of a doctor who noticed faint signs of life saved him. Emergency surgery repaired the damage, and within months, Walker returned to work. Publicly, the incident was framed as a miracle survival story. Privately, it altered everything. His daughter later confirmed that the accident haunted him. He rarely spoke about it, but his behavior changed. He became more withdrawn, more vigilant, and more emotionally guarded. The experience forced him to confront mortality in a way he had never allowed himself to do before. Despite the trauma, Walker resumed his career almost immediately. To the industry, this reinforced his reputation as indestructible. To his family, it revealed something else. A man who did not know how to stop, even when stopping might have saved him from deeper isolation. That near-death experience did not soften him. It hardened the boundaries he placed around his private life, and those boundaries would shape the relationship he had with his children for the rest of his life. What his daughter saw behind closed doors inside the home, Clint Walker was not the man audiences thought they knew. His daughter later confirmed that the strength people admired on television did not translate into emotional openness at home. He was present, reliable, and deeply protective, but he struggled to communicate anything that resembled vulnerability. Conversations were practical, often brief, and rarely emotional. He listened more than he spoke, and when topics turned personal, he tended to shut them down. According to his daughter, Walker expressed love through structure rather than words. He showed up when it mattered. He paid attention to details. He made sure the household never lacked stability. But affection was rarely verbalized. Apologies were almost never spoken aloud. When conflicts arose, he chose silence over confrontation. That silence, she explained, could feel heavier than anger. As she grew older, his emotional distance became more noticeable. He discouraged discussions about fear, sadness, or uncertainty. His belief was simple and rigid. Those things were private burdens, not shared ones. His daughter later said this belief likely came from his early life and military service, where emotional restraint was equated with survival. After the skiing accident, these tendencies intensified. Walker became more protective of his personal space and more resistant to questions about his health or mental state. If asked how he was feeling, he redirected the conversation or minimized the issue. His daughter confirmed that he feared becoming a burden more than he feared death itself. There were moments when the cracks appeared. She recalled periods when he seemed restless, pacing late at night, lost in thought. He slept poorly and often isolated himself after long days. Yet even in those moments, he refused help. He believed that asking for support would undermine the very identity that had carried him through life. Only years later did his daughter understand that this behavior was not emotional coldness. It was fear. Fear of losing control, fear of disappointing others, and fear that exposing weakness would undo everything he had built. Clint Walker loved his family deeply, but he loved them in a way that kept him alone. These realizations would take on new meaning after his death, when she finally felt free to speak honestly about the man behind the legend. The rumors that followed him for decades. For most of his career, Clint Walker was surrounded by rumors, but not the kind Hollywood thrives on. There were no public scandals, no tabloid explosions, no courtroom dramas. Instead, the rumors were quieter and more unsettling. People spoke about his emotional distance. They questioned his withdrawal from social circles. Some wondered if he was depressed. Others speculated about long-term illness. Walker never addressed any of it. His daughter later confirmed that many of these rumors were rooted in truth, but stripped of context. Walker deliberately avoided Hollywood culture. He declined invitations, skipped industry events, and kept journalists at arm's length. This was not shyness, it was strategy. He believed that privacy was something you defended aggressively or lost entirely. In interviews throughout the 70s and 80s, Walker consistently redirected personal questions back to work. When asked about family life, he offered polite but vague answers. He never corrected misconceptions because doing so would require disclosure. Silence was simpler and safer. As the Western genre faded and his appearances became less frequent, speculation increased. Fans assumed he had chosen a peaceful retirement. According to his daughter, that assumption was incomplete. Retirement brought relief from physical demands, but it also removed structure. Walker had spent his entire adult life operating within rigid routines. Once those routines disappeared, his inner restlessness became harder to manage. He filled his time with isolation rather than connection. He preferred familiar environments and predictable schedules. Visitors were limited. Phone calls were brief. Even with family, conversations remained controlled. His daughter explained that he feared emotional exposure more than loneliness. This behavior fueled the idea that Clint Walker was aloof or emotionally inaccessible. What people didn't understand was that he was actively holding himself together. The rumors were not about scandal. They were about a man quietly unraveling under the weight of everything he never allowed himself to say. The final years, and the silence that remained in the last decade of his life, Clint Walker's health declined steadily. Congestive heart failure became an unspoken reality. He slowed down physically, but mentally, he remained rigidly independent. According to his daughter, he resisted assistance until it was unavoidable. Accepting help felt like defeat. Doctors' visits were kept private. Family members were informed only when necessary. Walker did not want concern or sympathy. He wanted normalcy, even when normal was no longer possible. This insistence created emotional distance in his final years, even as those closest to him tried to stay connected. There were no dramatic confessions, no deathbed revelations. Walker did not revisit past regrets or explain himself. His daughter later said that this was consistent with how he lived. He believed that words were insufficient to fix what had already happened. When he passed away just days before his birthday, the public response focused on legacy. Tributes highlighted strength, longevity, and iconic status. The man was celebrated. The struggle was not mentioned. For his daughter, grief was complicated. She mourned not only the loss of her father, but the conversations they never had, the things he never allowed himself to express, the emotional distance he maintained even as his body failed him. It was only after his death that she felt capable of speaking freely, not to accuse him, not to dismantle his image, but to complete it. What his daughter finally confirmed. When Clint Walker's daughter finally addressed the rumors surrounding her father's private life, she did not arrive with shocking revelations or dramatic accusations. Instead, she offered something far heavier and far more unsettling: confirmation that the silence people associated with Clint Walker was not an accident, not a personality quirk, and not emotional coldness. It was a belief system he lived by for decades. To him, strength meant not speaking. Pain was something to be contained, not shared. And revealing inner struggle was, in his mind, a risk to the people he loved most. She explained that her father truly believed vulnerability was dangerous. He had grown up learning that survival required endurance and control, long before Hollywood ever shaped his public image. By the time fame arrived, that mindset was already fixed. The cowboy audiences admired was not an act he switched on and off. It was a continuation of how he had learned to exist in the world. Silence became both armor and identity. According to his daughter, Clint Walker lived with constant emotional tension. Fear was part of his daily life, though he never named it as such. There was fear of failing as a provider, fear of becoming physically weak, fear of depending on others, and fear that if he allowed himself to break, he would never be able to put himself back together again. Guilt followed closely behind. Guilt for being absent during long stretches of work. Guilt for the emotional distance his discipline created. Guilt for moments he could not undo, even when he wished he could. Exhaustion, too, was a permanent presence. Not just physical exhaustion from years of demanding labor and injury, but emotional exhaustion from maintaining an image he felt obligated to protect. His daughter confirmed that even in moments of rest, he rarely seemed at ease. Relaxation felt unfamiliar to him. Stillness left room for thoughts he preferred not to confront. What many people interpreted as emotional distance, she clarified, was actually self-protection. Clint Walker did not withdraw because he lacked love. He withdrew because he believed love meant shielding others from his inner struggles. In his mind, burdening family members with fear or sadness would be an act of selfishness. Carrying everything alone was, to him, an expression of responsibility. This confirmation forced a reevaluation of the man audiences thought they knew. Clint Walker was not unbreakable. He was disciplined to the point of isolation. His strength was real, but it came at a profound cost. The cost was connection. The cost was openness. The cost was a lifetime spent managing pain quietly rather than processing it openly. His daughter did not ask the public to diminish his legacy. She did not ask for pity or condemnation. She asked for understanding. She wanted people to recognize that behind the towering image was a human being shaped by fear, obligation, and a relentless sense of duty. The legend of Clint Walker still stands. The cowboy, the icon, the symbol of endurance. But beside that legend now stands the fuller truth. A man who survived by staying silent, endured more than he ever admitted, and paid dearly for the image that made him unforgettable. Do you think Clint Walker's silence was an act of strength or a form of self-destruction? Should we admire public icons for the image they gave us? Or for the private battles they never shared? Leave your thoughts in the comments, and if you value stories that go beyond the surface, don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us for the next untold story.